Hey guys, how are you all doing? About once every FromSoft game's lifecycle that has PvP, I'm allowed to make like exactly one good Pyromancer build that I really like. Which is kind of an insane thing to say in Elden Ring, like this late into the game's lifecycle. Catch Flame, Giant's Flame, Take Thee, Burn O Flame, just tons of good faith-scaling pyromancies. Since launch, why have I just waited all this time to make a Pyromancer? And it was because this whole time I wanted to kind of make a Mountaintops Astrologer. If you read the description of the sword in Night and Flame, it talks about how the original astrologers lived alongside the giants of the mountaintops who were all pyromancers. So I already knew there was this connection between sorcery and flame, and I was hoping that the DLC would tie that all together. There's a little bit of that already with the magma sorceries, like sorcery and flame. But just every time I tried to make that build, I would either have to use a weapon that needed to be buffed in order to be used properly, and then also need to hold two different catalysts in both hands. So that build really never came together in the base game. But with the Staff of the Great Beyond, which allows you to multicast both incantations and sorceries, I finally found the tool that I needed to put this build all together. Keeping in line with what I've done with all of these build videos for the Age of Mage, I'm going to talk about what makes this build tick, what makes this build really work in invasions. In the first half of the video and in the second half of the video, I want to give a bit of character lore, but then also talk about the broader subject of celestial worship in Elden Ring's lore. So with that all being said, here is my sun-worshipping pyromancer, the Chaos Perihelion. So here are the stats and gear of the character. This character was originally named Gelmir Stargazer, but I changed it to Chaos Perihelion for lore reasons I want to talk about in a little bit. For reference, this is at rune level 94 with plus 25 weapons. The idea behind rune level 94 is that the highest it can match up to is 124, which nicely avoids the rune level 125 bonfire duelists who think that Seamless is a good place for duels, or that invasions are a good place for duels in general. This is an old school Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3 Pyromancer. It has 30 Faith and 30 Intelligence. The Flask of Wondrous Physic boosts fire damage with the Flame Shrouding tier. And I also like to give myself 10 more Intelligence so I can hit 40 Int, which is necessary to cast Rykard's Rancor, which is a big part of the Magma sorceries of this build. I don't quite know where I want to put this in the video just yet, but I did want to talk about the Talisman of the Dread. Because this was kind of the original idea behind the build. I would use magma spells, maybe some other fire spells, have those all boosted by the Flame Shrouding tier, and then use a magma weapon, either Rykard's sword, I guess it's the Sword of Blasphemy, or one of those serpent weapons like the Magma Whip or the Magma Sword, and I would boost all of those magma attacks with the Talisman of the Dread. Initially, when I first read about the Talisman of the Dread, I kind of assumed it would only boost the magma that gets put on the ground by magma attacks, but it actually boosts the entire attack itself by a flat rate, which is actually pretty good. The thing is, though, I'm not lacking in damage, and what I was kind of lacking in was cast speed, so I ended up taking it off, just replacing with Radagon's Icon, but I always kind of regret that a little bit. If I was making this build at 125 or higher, I would probably knock off a few of those just stat boosting talismans and replace them with stuff like the Graven Mass sorcery and the Talisman of the Dread, just to really up my magma sorcery damage and just see how fun that would be. I also don't know if that's a good idea either, because I really only use magma sorceries as a utility class of sorceries and not my main forms of damage on this build. Main weapons I'm using are Sword of Night, which sadly is the only true faith and int scaling weapon in this game. I of course also use Rolana's Twin Blades, which are a weapon that lies to you. It pretends that it's a faith and int weapon, which sure, it does scale off of that. It's really much more of a dex and int weapon. It reminds me a lot of the Dancer's swords from Dark Souls 3, minus all of the really unique and cool combos you could do with that weapon, because it's Elden Ring, now it shoots lasers. It also does do this cool Firestorm effect, although I've yet to make that do any real damage to anyone, so I'm not that enamored with it. I pretty much just use the Sword of Night and Flame, which is a perfectly good straight sword. Does a lot of damage, it has pokes, has no really other notable properties. Nope, not that I can really think of right now. Okay, I guess we could talk about it a little bit. Just over 3 years ago, Elden Ring came out, and on launch there was a whole bunch of weapons that were stupidly broken, one of which was the Sword of Night and Flame. I think about around patch 103, they attempted to severely nerf this thing, and then called it a day. I'm trying to find good information on this. Maybe I should just watch a Crite video. I'm reading some posts that say it got a 30% damage nerf to its Ash of War. Some people are saying the stance R1 beam got nerfed, and that they sorta nerfed the stance R2, which is the big flame wave. The flame wave does absurd damage and has like deceptively a ton of range. I'm hitting a lot of my opponents for around 1200 damage, depending on what kind of armor they're wearing or if they're wearing a Sword Seal. But 1200 damage is a lot of damage no matter what kind of build you're playing with here. It certainly doesn't help that I would say most Seamless players that I encounter have around 900 hit points. And like, this is rune level 94. 900 hit points isn't really a lot, but it's, you know, what most people are going to invest in at this point in the game. I'd say to your like average or casual player that like Elden Ring doesn't do a lot to encourage you to level your vigor until like later in the game. And so while at rune level 94, 900 hit points seems like not nearly enough. I think for a lot of these players, it does for PvE. For PvP, when somebody invades you and does 1200 damage, yeah, like you probably need a little bit more vigor. Rune level 94 is the time to start pumping that up. You have your damage, you probably have your weapon that you're sticking with. Now it's time to start pumping vigor. And the Sword of Night and Flame is kind of your wake-up call to do so. Of course, the Sword of Night and Flame's stance R2 attack is slow, is very visible, and it's pretty easy to dodge. So now we have a classic invader, or even just like a fighting game problem, which is how do we make our strongest attack easier to land, or harder to dodge? The solution that I found is that you just disguise the attack in explosions. This is the real utility of the magma spells, in my opinion. Magma's big property in Elden Ring is that it puts lava on the floor. That's only kind of helpful, but the other thing that a lot of magma sorceries do is that they fucking explode. And that big fiery explosion that kind of hurts your eyes and your PC's GPU, that's going to be our disguise for the charge up of the Sword of Night R2. The two magma sorceries that have the best explosions are going to be Roiling Magma and Rykard's Rancor. Roiling Magma is basically a safe zone that you cast. It's not really a safe zone, but it's like this big charging, seething ball of chaos, right? Seething chaos from Dark Souls 3. Anyone? It's literally the exact same spell, but now it's a sorcery, and then it also puts some magma on the ground, which is a nice little touch. But that's not the point. The point is the explosion, which I don't know if it's the VFX, the way they did the VFX in this game, or if it's just like the effect it has on the lighting. But everything goes a little dark after this giant bright thing explodes. What you want to do is, as it's reaching that explosion point, just to start the stance R2 charge and just like let it go off. It has way more range than you think it's going to have, or that anyone really thinks it's going to have. And again, if you're doing a 30-30 build with Instant Faith on the Sword of Night and Flame, it's going to do about 1200 damage. Let's just start talking about Roiling Magma, okay? Because that's like the real MVP of this build. I know everybody wants to see Giant's Flame take the explode, you know, they want to see that big apocalypse level meteor hurling down at their opponents, and for them to go flying off a cliff. It's just not what I want this build to be. I think those moments can be cool, but I've seen enough YouTube shorts, 10-minute YouTube compilations of like a guy drinking his physic, slapping on Flame Grant Me Strength, and then like, you know, pulling out both Giant's Flame Seals and then throwing the big fireball that kills everyone immediately. We've all seen that a million times. And while that does release dopamine into our brains or whatever the fuck, I'm just trying to like find a slightly different neuron activation to get that dopamine to release in your brain. So instead, you have the pleasure of watching me drink probably the exact same physic, put on Flame Grant Me Strength, but this time I'm casting Rykard's Rancor, and in all the explosions, I'm doing my own slightly different fire attack that does all of somebody's hit points all at once. See, now that dopamine's swimming around in your brain, right? Is that what dopamine does? I don't know. My wife's the doctor, not me. You know whose dopamine is not flowing right now? this guy who just watched his friend take 1300 damage, who then just like fled in fear into the level. That's something you don't really see as much in Elden Ring, but you saw it a lot more in Dark Souls 3, where you'd kill a phantom and the host would panic and run into something they really shouldn't. You don't see that as much happening anymore in Elden Ring because, you know, we're playing in an open world, and a lot of the time there just isn't a level to run the wrong way into. I do want to make it clear that Roiling Magma isn't only good for charging your nuke. It's good for charging a different nuke, like Giant's Flame Take Beat, right? But it's good for, like, I need some space just to heal. I need some space to set up other spells. I need space to drink my blue flask. Elden Ring invasions can often feel super claustrophobic, just because you don't have any space to do anything. I know some people like to say Elden Ring is the game where, like, it's never the invader's turn, and I do kind of like that expression a lot. But I just think Elden Ring puts the onus on the invader to make that kind of space. So we put our Roiling Magma down, and then we get ready for our next action that we're going to make uninterrupted. Or you're dealing with the dumbest people alive, and they're going to run right into the thing that is like telling you in all these different ways that it's gonna fucking explode. And then they're surprised when it does in fact explode. It's like they need the big red arrow to pop up on their HUD and be like, this is gonna kill you, don't walk into it. But they walk into it all the time. So obviously I have a great love for Roiling Magma, but it is only third on my spell slot order, and that's because I have two other harassment / poking type spells first and second. The first is Fire Serpent, because any spell that can provide asynchronous pressure is absurdly good in Elden Ring. Fire Serpent also will trigger at point blank range if you cast it right in someone's face, so it can kind of work as like a stand-in for Catch Flame if you need it to sometimes. Fire Serpent's cast time is also super fast, so you can kind of just keep throwing it out there whenever you want. It's great from neutral, it's great in case you need like a chase down, because you can kind of just cast it and keep running. I really like to land combos off of it, so you can cast it and then wait like half a second and then throw out an R2. That combo actually gets a fair amount of players, even some pretty experienced players out there. I'm able to land the Fire Serpent into R2 combo. I've also landed Fire Serpent into Magma Shot combo a couple times, which also feels quite nice. In terms of Magma Shot, its main use is as a poke. I think I'm ripping that line directly off of Pure Platinum Prynne's Geomancer video. If you've never seen that video, I'll link it in the comments, and if I don't link it in the comments because I'm often a lazy piece of shit, you should yell at me in said comments. The Geomancer vid is like a legendary Mage video, in my opinion. It's from back in the base game days of Elden Ring, so pre-Shadow of the Erdtree, obviously. But one of the things that Prynne did really well in that video was free aim Magma Shot, which is what I should be doing in all of these clips, where I'm just like doggedly locked on to my opponent. I'm getting a little bit better at free aiming Magma Shot. In between invasions, I kind of hang out in that like Serpent Church in Volcano Manor, and I just try to like ping and poke all the chandeliers and candlesticks with a Magma Shot, like free aimed, just to try to practice that skill, because that's really like Magma Shot at its best. We can catch somebody who's running by just predicting where they're gonna be with the Magma Shot. But locked on, it's very effective if someone's just like running straight at you and you know they're getting ready to attack. Just like poke them right in the face with a Magma Shot. I should talk about the other two Magma spells. I touched briefly on Rykard's Rancor, just because it also does the thing where I can hide the charge up of the Sword of Night and Flames Stance R2 attack with it. But it is quite good for just like general chaos creation. Kind of just scatters people and makes them panic a little bit. But I think really its best use case is its like lingering aspects, right? It doesn't have a huge lingering hitbox, but you can tell where it's going to explode. So what I attempt to do is try to have it wrap around itself. I try to stand in the chain that's about to explode and see if I can bait people to come back into it. It also is kind of just a space creator like Roiling Magma. Lastly, you have Gelmir's Fury, and Gelmir's Fury just kind of sucks. Like, the only reason this spell's on the spell order is because this is a Magma build, and Gelmir's Fury is a Magma spell. I think it's supposed to have some hyper armor. It has very light hyper armor that is very easy to get knocked out of. It is kind of a long cast time. Its hitbox is really weird. Its initial burst of damage is pretty good, but not as good as like Roiling Magma or Giant's Flame Take Thee, or really even just like an R2 from a decent weapon. It's also kind of weird in that you can hold it down for longer and spew out more lava, which all don't do that great of damage anyways in the first place. And I think there's some sort of desync issue where the lava looks like it's hitting your opponent, but isn't actually. It's a very bizarre spell that I'm glad like I gave it a shot, but I'm probably going to replace it in the spell order sometime pretty soon here. You know what else I count as spells are all the consumables in this game. Of course, I'm talking about fire coils here. What a good consumable. That is also really annoying because you kind of have to dupe them all in because they're a bit of a pain in the ass to farm for. If you have the means of duping, I would highly recommend. If you don't, I wouldn't really recommend like farming these. Just, you know, go ahead and use Fire Serpent. But it's really good in Seamless. And if you're playing Seamless, I assume you can dupe these in because you're on PC. On Seamless, these are basically just like, you don't get to ride your horse away from me. If someone's riding their horse away from me, you know the fire coils are coming out. They can be thrown from horseback, but unfortunately you do need to slow down to throw them, so it's not quite that same like Smith Strip Spear, the thrill of the hunt kind of moments from the Drowned Knight vid that I made a couple weeks ago. For your moment-to-moment PvP, fire coils are still pretty excellent. I put them on my hotbar because I just treat them like another spell. I'm throwing out Flame Serpent, I'm free aiming some Magma shots, hopefully. I'm free aiming some Giant's Flame Take These, and I'm also just throwing out fire coils all the time. Initially, I was kind of thinking that maybe fire coils would be a great like finisher. Like you do a lot of damage with a cool spell combo, and then the last thing you'd throw out is the fire coils to chase them down while you walk away facing your own camera. But they don't work very well with any sort of elevation. If you're fighting, you know, maybe you're on the bottom of stairs or even like adjacent to some stairs or fighting on a hill, the release point of the fire coils is kind of low, so a lot of the time they'll hit that elevation instead of like traveling upwards in like a smooth, like straight line or something like that. You're almost always better off just throwing out a fire serpent and then chasing them yourself, rather than hoping the strange arc of fire coils works to your favor. I've seen some people use kind of a cool tech where they'll throw the fire coils in a different direction, and right as they're releasing them, they'll lock onto their opponent. And then the coils will bend back around, and oftentimes it seems like they're coming from like off the other person's camera too. So they have kind of a crazy arc if you can pull that off. I'm not super interested in doing that. I think a fire serpent will suffice for now. But yeah, I've actually talked way longer about fire coils than I wanted to. It's not that deep. And I mentioned the word tech too, which is just kind of sweaty and gross. Like, we're doing seamless co-op, brother. It's not that serious. Anyways, last note on consumables here. I'm using the Hefty furnace pot because it just has a huge area of effect. Initially, upon launch, I was like, where's the big faith scaling exploding pot? And for some reason, I was hoping they'd put in a, like, pot version of Giant's Flame Take Thee. So I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad they gave us something a little bit different. Its use case for me, at least, is just hitting people around corners. It has some really cool VFX, but most of the time I'd rather just be using Giant's Flame Take Thee anyways. I also just wanted to talk pretty quickly about just like the state of Seamless co-op in general. So when I made my Drowned Knight build, I was a little concerned. I was like, you know, maybe people at rune level 60 just aren't very smart. They haven't learned how to play the game yet, and I'm just clubbing them with DLC weapons and, you know, late game talismans, etc. My theory was around like rune level 70, 80, people would start to like learn how to play the game. And that's true for like 75, 80% of hosts I run into. They're a little bit more of a challenge. They've put stuff into their builds that makes them capable of killing me. But you still run into like the seamless stereotype, which is like people at like rune level 90 who have 400 vigor, or people who just have like not even a semblance of situational awareness. Some of you invaders might be like, oh, yeah, dumb hosts. The invaders I've encountered, the co-invaders I've encountered, have not been very impressed, I must say. I often get very annoyed at vanilla Elden Ring for making the invaders so bright red, and I get that they're trying to communicate to hosts and other invaders that, like, these are the bad guys, their goal is to kill the host. But I just don't think we can really teach, like, all invaders to think critically at all. I think a lot of them are just that living embodiment of that meme where it's like, I don't know who I am, I don't know where I am, I just know that I must kill. And I think that's just like a lot of invaders in this game. It happens to be, I think, how NPC invaders are coded too. Old White Mask finishes me off quite expertly here. But it was something I was thinking about, like the dynamics of like the Watchdogs of Farron or the Eldritch Faithfuls in DS3. They couldn't hit each other, but they could hit other red invaders, which as a red was endlessly annoying. So if FromSoft ever brings back Covenants or decide that they like matter again, because honestly, Covenants in Dark Souls 3 aren't that strong either. I would love a little bit more interaction between them. I always thought Eldritch Faithfuls or the Farron Watchdogs, it would be cool if they got rewards, different types of rewards for killing different types of phantoms, like even red phantoms. I know that would be really annoying to some of you invaders, but I just think that kind of Covenant interaction would be really cool. Why am I talking about Covenants in a Elden Ring video post Shadow of the Erdtree? What the fuck are we doing here? The broader point here is that Reds and Seamless are also dumb. What I would encourage you to do, which I've been doing a little bit, is running Tantra's Tongue runs while inviting other players into your world and turning friendly fire on. That's been some really chaotic experiences. I'm hoping to record a few more of those in the future. I recorded none for this particular video just because I was like playing without OBS on. But co-op with friendly fire on is an extremely fun experience. It's something that I hope they never make like the default co-op experience, because let me tell you, people would start really hating mages. Well, they already hate mages. But really hating the Guts cosplays, because those people swing that sword around and would just murder their friends constantly, which would be pretty funny, but I also think would make a really frustrating co-op experience for people who are just genuinely trying to co-op. And since I feel like I do have to make people aware of this every single time, these games are an ecosystem. We invaders are a little bit like hunters in that we really need to foster a good environment for our co-opers, for invasions basically to continue and also to be fun for a long time. Anytime some co-opper is made aware of PvP on Reddit or like Fextra Life comments, they go on a big rant, which always includes like, why don't you PvPers just get your own game? And that's honestly the last thing any of us PvPers really want. The whole draw of invasions is that we want to be outnumbered against players who don't know what they're doing as well, but still have the capability to kill us. Like, the whole point is to be a challenge to us and a challenge to them in a sort of uneven way. Not that it's slated towards either side, but that neither side has the clear advantage, but it's also not a completely level playing field for either. The last thing any of us really want to do is invade bonfire duelists forever. Time for the lore section. I realized that I kind of introduced the name of this character, which is, again, Chaos Perihelion, without really explaining what the hell a perihelion is. A perihelion is the point of an orbit for like a comet or a planet that is closest to the sun. I didn't really know this was a term until I listened to King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizards Infest the Rat's Nest. It's quite a mouthful of a sentence. But anyways, King Gizzard has been making a couple of these like death metal environmentalist albums that have been liking a lot lately. And Perihelion is this song about a starship that is trying to flee a ruined Earth and uses the sun's gravity as a slingshot to get to Venus. But while using that gravitational slingshot, a solar flare like interrupts their route and just melts the entire ship. There's a line in there about like no recalculating the route, we're just counting the seconds till we're done. I don't know, for some reason that really like sticks with me. There's a couple other scenes in the Three Body Problem trilogy that remind me of that a lot. So that song's been running through my head a lot. So when I was making this character, that was kind of all about like the stars and the sun, right? Because sorcery in Elden Ring is all about the stars. And while I was thinking about it and doing my invasions, this song just like kept playing over and over in my head. So I feel like Perihelion captures this idea of like a sorcerer who's as close to the sun as you can be. Because it seems like the Giant's Flame, or like especially Flame of the Fell God, is basically just a giant sun. And if you look at the sky of Elden Ring, the sun is this very diminished thing, which I think reflects the Fell God's presence in the world. It's extremely diminished, it barely matters anymore, and most of the ambient light that you feel or like see in the lands between seems to all come directly from the Erdtree. Now, this is the Chaos Perihelion, because my original idea was this was going to be like a Chaos Pyromancer, like Dark Souls 1 looking ass Pyromancer that's a little bit demony, that's wearing rags. Fashion didn't really work out like that, so instead we have this like glintstone looking sorcerer with horns growing out of them. I'll take it. Also, in the Dark Souls games, a lot of the Chaos Pyromancies would leave behind trails of lava, which the Magma sorceries kind of channel that same effect. But what I really wanted to talk about here is just like what the hell's going on with fire in Elden Ring. Like, there's like 8 or 9 different types of fire. There's just like regular fire that seems to be present in the world, like just torches and stuff. But then you have the Giant's Flame, Ghost Flame, Flame of Frenzy, Black Flame, Blood Flame, Mesmer's Flame, the flame that comes from the Putrescent Night spells, which is apparently not Ghost Flame. There's a Glintstone Dragon that breathes fiery glintstone on us because he ate too many sorcerers. There's the Golden Flames that Placidusax and the Elden Beast all breathe on us as well. Morgott mentions a flame of ambition. It just keeps going, man. I can just keep listing fires in obscure ways. This team loves to make fires. But what do all of like these main sources of fire all have in common? Like if you look at every single outer god or attempted outer god, they almost all have their own source of fire in some different way. So my grand overarching theory with fire is that it simply represents entropy and change, and which is not uncommon for FromSoft games. This is the exact same thing in Dark Souls 1, and they talk about it in the intro cutscene, where disparity didn't really exist in the Age of Grey. It was only when the First Flame came about that there was any sort of difference in change in the world. That's why the dragons were immortal and then they were killed. And the previous world order was totally upheaved. It's like a fire comes and burns away the old world so a new one can take root and emerge. And each of these outer gods seem to have some sort of agenda that they want to do with their fire. Like we've talked about, like the Flame of Frenzy wants to burn everything back into the one greater whole. The Godskins and their Black Flame basically just want to murder the current order of gods and replace them with their own. Ghost Flame's kind of an interesting one because it seems like it was a way of decomposing old bodies so that like new things could be fertilized by those ashes. But I think there's something unique specifically about Magma and how it's kind of represented in all of these From Software games, right? Because Magma tends to appear where Chaos Pyromancies are present in the Dark Souls series. I was chatting the other day in Discord about why the humanity infusion in Dark Souls 1 makes sense, and my initial explanation for this was that you draw power from souls by leveling up. Every time you level up, you invest those souls into yourself, and then your weapon draws power from an infusion with the power that you've already invested in yourself. Whereas humanity and like the chaos infusion that scales off of humanity is kind of like this new power that is specific to humans. Fel, I'm sure many of you know who Fel is. If you know who my channel is, you probably also know who Philosophicity is. But anyways, they had a great theory on essentially the Chaos Flame and its relationship with humanity versus the First Flame. We fuel the First Flame and basically all the bonfires that connect back to the First Flame with humanity in Dark Souls 1, and in return we receive more healing, we receive more Estus. And the entirety of the Way of White, which is a faith based on the First Flame and belief in the First Flame, also focuses all of their energy around like healing spells. But when we feed the Chaos Flame via like a Chaos Infusion, when we feed it humanity, we're instead given power. The Chaos Flame in general kind of like consumes everybody it touches, right? It consumed the Witch of Izalith into this terrible boss fight. But then also all the Witches of Izalith all became demons, and it all kind of like consumes and curses all of them in this quest for power. It curses them in that they become demons, but they also become more powerful in a way. A lot of them do, at least. And so the general theory is that chaos is always hungry. It's always like looking to expand, it's always looking to consume. I think the presence of lava anywhere in Dark Souls is meant to imply like the Chaos Flame is nearby. It's why the Lost Izalith is filled with really terrible looking lava, and when you cast Chaos Pyromancies in any of the Souls games, they leave behind lava on the ground. And guess who channels a lot of lava in Elden Ring, right? It's Rykard and his following of people who just want to consume. They want to destroy other foes to make themselves stronger, and Rykard just wants to consume more powerful beings to become stronger. And people in Elden Ring who consume many dragon hearts in this quest for power, what do they become? Lava spewing magma worms. That's like the fate of every person who participates in Dragon Communion. So that's my general fire theory for Elden Ring, but also just all the FromSoft games. Fire just pretty much always represents some form of upheaval or entropy, like times that are changing. While meanwhile, lava seems to represent something that's just constantly consuming and growing. So that's about it for this video. I'm going to change up the spell order a little bit, and then I'm just going to keep invading this whole week and see what other kind of spell combinations will work, but I doubt I'll change it a lot. I feel really happy with this build, almost as much as I did with my Drowned Knight build, which is funny because I had planned this out like a couple months ago, and then in the meantime I tried to make a whole bunch of builds at rune level 72 work, and none of them did. I almost made a video last week about like how rune level 72 is the worst rune level for mages. I think I can just kind of condense that down now. Rune level 72 is really rough. You need like 50 vigor at rune level 72, but then you also have to have enough points to put into damage that are actually going to kill people at your rune level, and then you also have to have enough mind to actually cast spells, and then you also have to have enough endurance to wear like some armor that you want to wear. And this isn't even counting any points that you might want to put in strength and dex if you want to use a specific weapon that has slightly different physical stats. So you're just so strapped at rune level 72 to try to make things work as a mage that it's just not a good rune level for any sort of mage to really function well at. I've had a lot of success with just like straight up strength for dex builds at rune level 72. And then rune level 81, which is kind of like my next de facto bracket, I have a mage that works really, really well there. I made a couple videos on that character. It's called the Sellian Onryu, if you haven't seen that before. You could check it out. The essential idea is that I go ham on using Glintstone Pebble on a Great Katana. Okay, that's not the whole build, but there's some stuff to it. Made some videos on it, you should just go watch those. Okay, that's all I gotta say about that. In fact, that's all for me, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.